I read Paradise Lost in my first year of university, and it was over my head. I did not. I really struggled with it in terms of understanding it all, and the diction was very difficult. I made the mistake of reading it silently and not reading it aloud, and I found it. You read to the bottom of the page and say, "Hold on, what did I just read?" And you have to go back again. It's like very frustrating. You have to read it aloud. But when I say read it aloud, it's not easy to read the long sentences with the right intonation. You've heard me read it, and you probably understood it better than when you read it. That's because I read it with understanding, and that helps. And that's why I read big tracts of it, to get that sense that it is comprehensible there, but you do have to know what you're reading as you read it, and that's part of the problem. So it is a high bar, but also just the subject matter was, I wasn't a Christian, but I knew there was something true in it, and I wanted to understand it. And so it encouraged me and inspired me to become an academic eventually. I got 61% in English after 1 year. I failed my first essay, but Paradise Lost grabbed me, and it propelled me into a different trajectory in my life than I would have otherwise taken. So did you have a comment or a question? Or
yeah, actually, I found when I was looking for the book Paradise Lost online.
Yes.
I actually found a website where it's read out loud.
Okay, yeah, there's some. Was it good?
It was fantastic.
Okay.
LibriVox.org.
Okay.
And it was really helpful because then I could follow along with what was being read while I was listening to someone read it.
It was really, really well. I think it's helpful myself. And yeah, and the other thing you can, there's all sorts of sources. So there was the 400th anniversary of Milton's birth at the University of Cambridge. They had a whole series of readings. The BBC has commissioned famous actors to read it. There's all sorts of recordings out there with really good readers, and they tend to read with, I shouldn't say, they can read with understanding sometimes, but they certainly have good voices. But it's the understanding that will put the emphasis in the right place and emphasize the right things, as opposed to emphasize things in which you've misunderstood what's been said. You'll find that in church as well. People will read the Bible sometimes. You know what? They didn't prepare for it, and they don't even understand what they just read. And everyone who's just listened to it has suffered from the consequence of that. Yes. Oh, yes. Like every verse, I don't know, but it's often in anthologies which have, the extended textual apparatus. They'll have references, but there are so many references that you would struggle to do them all. It's filled with scriptural references. Some of them are like so even the creation of Satan, sin, and death. That's from James 1 verse 16, 17, something like that. Right? But it's clearly not what James means. James does not mean, there it is, 15 rather. Each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Oh dear. Go away. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Okay, there you go. One comes from the other, And so Milton uses that to create the three great personages that are, defying God in book 2. And the description of that sin comes from a false desire, a desire that opposes God. He doesn't say it comes from Satan here, but Milton is building on that. I would say that's scriptural. Is it what is intended by Scripture? I don't think so. But there is something of the experience, and this is what makes it profound, that sin seems to have a personal identity, and death is often portrayed in literature and in experience as a personal enemy. We have trouble identifying enemies that aren't personal. They seem personally malevolent. We'll say more about death next, a little bit later on when we look at the death of Ivan Illich and his portrait of death. We saw it in the medieval Everyman, where death was a figure. We're a little bit more acquainted with that. But anyway, yes. So from that, let me go on. I said we were going to look at the rape of the lock, and now I am short on time, so I get about half an hour to do it. So this will be fun. The Rape of the Lock is a text written by, and it says a heroic comical, or it's often called a mock epic because it mocks the conventions of the epic. Written in the period of the Enlightenment by an Englishman by the name of Alexander Pope, who was a Catholic, and as such, excluded from a great deal of English public life. In most of Europe, if you're a Protestant, you're excluded from much of public life. It depends on your monarch. If your monarch's a Protestant, then the benefits of being a citizen are attributed to Protestants or Catholics, respectively, depending on where you are. Growing up in England as a Catholic, he's excluded from a great number of things. One of them is an education. He cannot go to Oxford or Cambridge universities. He cannot be a part of the court. He's a man of letters. He has all sorts of challenges in life. He was, I believe, a dwarf. He had serious problem with his spine. Like he was twisted and so forth. He's a brilliant man. One of the great wits of his age. Delightful to his friends. Terrific sense of humor. But in terms of his physique, he was tortured just by his physical makeup. And he had, as I say, by being Catholic in England, had the state not persecuting him, but excluding him from the things that his gifts would have otherwise led him to. And yet, writes and is considered the great poet of his day. He writes here a mock epic. He doesn't only write a mock epic, he also translates Homer into English in rhyming couplets. So to give you something of a sense of the age and its learning, and the Renaissance is famous for its learning. This is the 18th century, early 18th century, and they are still reading Greek and Latin texts in the original and translating them. And Pope's translation is famous. As I say, rhyming couplets, not to my taste. Milton has just written his epic in not rhyming couplets in English. Milton says that the writing of couplets is the product of a barbarous age. Well, the Enlightenment claims to have escaped barbarism, and yet it's writing in rhyming couplets, which is somewhat humorous. But Pope writes this to mock the epic conventions, and it's part of his age. It's often called the age of satire as well. One of the great satirists of his age we'll read next time. His name is Jonathan Swift, famous for Gulliver's Travels. We're not going to read Gulliver's Travels, it's too long. But we'll read a shorter work of his, and you will get the bite of satire and what I mean by satire. That people talk about satire in our day, but we're not good at satire compared to them. There's no comparison. And there are different types of satire. Furthermore, some of them are more cheerful and some of them are really biting. Jesus wrote satire, by the way, or spoke and understood satire. I'll say more about that next class. Pope writes satires, but here he is writing a mock epic, and he's going to mock the conventions of the epic. So he'll still invoke a muse. He will still talk about heaven and hell and the earth. There will be spirits involved in it, following Milton's example. And yet, rather than writing about grand, serious, theologically important, anthropologically decisive moments in history where a grand leader comes forth, he is going to write about the most trivial thing he can imagine. He's mocking the epic just by, rather than the grand, the trivial. What is the trivial? A young woman has a young man who is sort of besotted with her, and he, without her consent, comes behind her and clips a lock of her hair off and acts as if she'd been raped. So it's the rape of the lock. Well, actually, he took a clipping of her hair. So it's to give seriousness to things that are trivial. And he's going to announce that right at the beginning. So when he sets the tone, it makes it humorous, because if you read classical works, there are actual rapes, and there are actually, wars and genuinely human tragedies. Here we're going to deal with a young man, a young woman, an aristocrat who gets up at noon and spends her day drinking coffee with her friends and playing cards, who has been assaulted by having a lock of her hair cut. And it's purposefully mocking the age of civility of their day, saying there's nothing really that bad here, and you are being triggered by an event that really is remarkably trivial. I'm just trying to contemporize this. But you can get a sense of this right from the get-go here. First line, Canto 1. What dire offense from amorous causes springs, what mighty contests rise from trivial things, I sing. There's the invocation of the muse. This verse to Carol, muse is due. This even Belinda may vouchsafe to view. Slight is the subject, but not so the praise, if she inspire and he approve my lays. So Milton has just announced that his epic will attempt things as yet unattempted, or prose or mind. In other words, the subject matter is as great as can be conceivable. Pope will openly confess that his subject matter is slight, insignificant, trivial. Say what strange motive, goddess, thou could compel a well-bred lord to assault a gentle belle. Oh, say what stranger cause yet unexplored could make a gentle belle reject a lord. And dwells such rage in softest bosoms then, and lodge such daring souls in little men. Saul through the white curtains shot a timorous ray. Now Saul, in this line you'll find that wherever there's a period here, it clarifies in the right-hand margin. On your page, yes, the right-hand margin. And ope those eyes that must eclipse the day. Now lapdogs give themselves the rousing shake, and sleepless lovers just at 12 awake. Thrice rung the bell, and the slipper knocked the ground, and the pressed watch returned a silver sound. Belinda still her downy pillow pressed, her guardian sylph prolonged the balmy rest. 'Twas he had summoned to her silent bed the morning dream that hovered o'er her head, a youth more glittering than a birthnight bow, that even in slumber caused her cheek to glow. Seemed to her ear his winning lips to lay, and thus in whispers said, or seemed to say, fairest of mortals. So you get the sense, just from the opening lines here, he's announced a trivial subject matter. He's announced a very sedate scene. We're not in hell. We're not in heaven. We are dealing with a young woman who's sleeping till noon. She's got a lapdog there that's shaking itself awake. She hears the chime of 12 on the alarm of her clock, whatever it is. And nonetheless, we have spiritual beings involved in the whole machinery of the epic. Fairest of mortals, thou distinguished care of thousand bright inhabitants of air, if e'er one vision touched thy infant thought, of all the nurse and all the priest have taught, of airy elves by moonlight shadows seen, the silver token and the circled green, or virgins visited by angel powers with golden grounds and wreaths of heavenly flowers, hear and believe, thy own importance know, nor bound thy narrow views to things below. Some secret truths from learned pride concealed, to maids alone and children are revealed. What though no credit doubting wits may give, oops, don't do that, I won't do that again. The fair and innocent shall still believe. Know then, unnumbered spirits round thee fly, the light militia of the lower sky. These, though unseen, are ever on the wing, hang o'er the box, and hover round the ring. Think what an equipage thou hast in air, and view with scorn 2 pages and a chair. As now your own, our beings were of old, and once enclosed in woman's beauteous mold. Let me just stop there. So what Pope is going to do is going to describe a host of celestial beings. And there are 4 types that he will use here from Rosicrucian philosophy. There are gnomes, there are sylphs. What are there? Salamanders and gnomes, sylphs, salamanders. So sylphs, salamanders, nymphs, and gnomes. That was it. Those 4. And they represent the spirits of women. After they die, they become these spirits, depending on their character. So if they're really grumpy or ill-tempered, then they become a salamander. If they're really pleasing and light and cheerful, they might become a sylph. But it depends on their character to some degree, what they transform into. They're not going to heaven. Again, Pope is not serious with this. I need to say it's a mock epic, but he's using this as an explanation. So here's how he explains the development of these spiritual beings. From earthly vehicles to these of air, think not when woman's transient breath is fled that all her vanities at once are dead. That's a little shot at women. There's no laughter. That's not good. Succeeding vanities she still regards, and though she plays no more, o'erlooks the cards. Her joy in gilded chariots, when alive, the love of Ombre after death survive. Ombre is a card game. For when the fair and all their pride expire, to their first elements the souls retire. The sprites of fiery termagants in flame mount up and take a salamander's name. Soft yielding minds to water glide away and sip with nymphs their elemental tea. The graver prude sinks downward to a gnome, in search of mischief still on earth to roam. The light coquettes in sylphs aloft repair, and sport and flutter in the fields of air. No farther yet. Whoever fair and chaste rejects mankind is by some sylph embraced. So the chaste are guarded by sylphs. So these are like the equivalent of guardian angels. So there's spiritual attendants that are connected to different types of women. For spirits freed from mortal laws with ease assume what sexes and what shapes they please. What guards the purity of melting maids in courtly balls and midnight masquerades, safe from the treacherous friend and daring spark, the glance by day, the whisper in the dark, when kind occasion prompts their warm desires, when music softens, and when dancing fires. 'Tis but their sylph, the wise celestials know, though honor is the word with men below. So what women do in the name of honor is actually done for them by the sylphs. So it gives a spiritual explanation for everything that happens on earth. So that's the divine machinery, as it were. And some nymphs there are too conscious of their face for life predestined to the gnome's embrace. So if they're too vain, then they become not a sylph, but rather a gnome and become prideful, etc. Yes? I don't know. That they are, well, I mean, I'm just expanding what is said here, that when women act with honor, it's because their guardian spirit, the sylph, is what has motivated the action. We attribute it to the person, where it's actually the action of the self. Again, do not think that Pope is serious in what he's saying here. It is a mock epic. So, some nymphs there are, too conscious of their face, for life predestined to the gnome's embrace. These swell their prospects and exalt their pride when offers are disdained and love denied. So they don't do it out of honor, they do it out of pride. They can also do it. And in that case, it's gnomes that are possessing them. While peers, dukes, and all their sweeping train, garters, stars, and cornets appear, and in soft town, your grace salutes their ear. 'Tis these that early taint the human soul, instruct the eyes of young coquettes to roll, teach infants' cheeks a bidden blush to know, and little hearts to flutter at a bow. Oft when the world imagine women stray, the sylphs through mystic mazes guide their way. Through all the giddy circle they pursue. So what we will have here, and I will speed through this because of this, is that the sylphs are behind earthly actions, or the other celestial beings. And the main of these sylphs, and the one that guards, the chief guardian of Belinda, the lady that's mentioned at the outset, his name is Ariel. Ariel is the same name that is used in William Shakespeare's The Tempest. If you've read The Tempest, seen The Tempest, Ariel's the sprite that's used to protect Miranda and so forth. But anyway, of these am I, that is a sylph, and who thy protection claim, a watchful sprite, and Ariel is my name. Late as I ranged the crystal wilds of air, in the clear mirror of thy ruling star, I saw, alas, some dread event impend, ere to the main this morning sun descend. But heaven reveals not what, or how, or where. Warned by thyself, O pious maid, beware. This to disclose is all thy guardian can. Beware of all, but most beware of man. He said, when Shock, who thought she slept too long, leapt up and waked his mistress with his tongue. Shock's the lapdog. 'Twas then, Belinda, if report say true, thy eyes first opened a billet doux, a love letter. Wounds, charms, and ardors were no sooner read, but all the vision vanished from thy head. And now, unveiled, the toilet stands displayed. Each silver vase in mystic order laid. First, robed in white, the nymph intent adores, with head uncovered, the cosmetic powers. The word cosmetic is derived from the Greek word cosmos. When you put cosmetics on your face, you make your face beautiful like the heavens. That's what cosmetics are. It's an adornment, it's a bauble, you're making the microcosm like the macrocosm in that sense. So the cosmetic powers, a heavenly image in the glass appears, to that she bends, to that her eyes she rears. The inferior priestess at her altar side, trembling begins the sacred rites of pride. Unnumbered treasures at once, and here the various offerings of the world appear. From each she nicely culls with curious toil, and decks the goddess with the glittering spoil. This casket India's glowing gems unlocks, and all Arabia breathes from yonder box. So we're going to get the sense that she's a microcosm of the macrocosm of the world. This box represents India, jewels. This box represents Arabia, spices, smells. The tortoise here, if you think about what tortoise shell is used for, it's used for combs and so forth. And likewise, elephant, ivory, and tortoise shell can be made into combs or clips or whatever. Transformed to combs, the speckled and the white. Here, files of pins extend their shining rows. Puffs, powders, patches, Bibles, billets doux. Note that Bibles is thrown in the midst of that. It's just one of the adornments. It's the trivialization of the Bible. She's going to carry a Bible because it looks good to carry it around. She'll have that under her arm. But it's just like the hair clips, and it's just an adornment. Now awful beauty puts on all its arms. The fair each moment rises in her charms, repairs her smiles, awakens every grace, and calls forth all the wonders of her face. Sees by degrees a purer blush her eyes, and keener lightnings quicken in her eyes. The busy sylphs surround their darling care. These set the head, and those divide the hair. Some fold the sleeve, while others plait the gown, and Betty's praised for labors not her own. Canto 2. So that there are 5 cantos. Note that the cantos he derives from Dante. It's an epic of sorts. Mocking the epic, it's short. It's just 5 cantos. Remember, the 5th canto of Dante's Inferno deals with the lovers in the Inferno, Paolo and Francesca. Pope, of course, knows that. So not with more glories in the ethereal plain, the sun first rises over the purpled main, then issuing forth the rival of his beams, launch on the bosom of the silver Thames, fair nymphs and well-dressed youths along the store. So let me skip over some of this. And the drinking of coffee and the playing of cards. I think I'll have to pick it up with cards because the card game is key. Okay, so let me pick it up in. So she gets out of bed. To give a plot summary, she gets out of bed, gets dressed, which is presented as this, as if being prepared for war, puts her war paint on, goes to Hampton Court, which is where the royals are, along with all the aristocratic young ladies in their finery, equally dressed up for it, in order to do what? To be served coffee and tea and biscuits and to play card games. And around them, sounds like a great day, and around them are these young men looking at the young women, trying to catch their eye, trying to get their favor. And the sign of their favor, I should have said this, that the sign of a woman's favor is a lock of her hair. And you will clasp it in a little thing and you'll hold it close to your heart. I'll treasure this forever. Such a, that sort of the courtly love convention, right? So hence the rape is that he took her lock. She didn't give him the lock. He took it, came behind, and he's a little mischievous, and clip. And then we'll go along saying, this is for Belinda. Da, 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 da. And she's outraged. She's lost her reputation. This is terrible. That's the scene that's being set here. So they go to Hampton Court, and where all of the great and the good congregate, kings, aristocrats, the courtiers, etc., and sometimes counsel take and sometimes tea. And hither the heroes and the nymphs resort, and all the pleasures of the court. It's noonday. The judges come, they're hungry, and now we get to playing cards. At ombre is a type of card game, singly to decide their doom. And swells her breast with conquests yet to come. Straight the 3 bands prepare in arms to join, each band the number of the sacred 9. I don't know enough. Sacred 9, there's 9 muses, but there might be 9 cards, 1 to 9 played in ombre. I've never played ombre. Soon as she spreads her hand, I don't know if you played cards, but you spread the hand of the cards. The aerial guard descend and sit on each important card. First, Ariel perched upon a matador. The 3 cards of the highest value in ombre, like trump. Then each according to the rank they bore. For sylphs, yet mindful of their ancient race, are as when women wondrous fond of place. Behold, 4 kings in majesty revered. Well, you got clubs, and you've got diamonds, and you got hearts, and you got spades. So these are the 4 kings that appear on this battlefield. With hoary whiskers and a forky beard, and 4 fair queens whose hands sustain a flower, the expressive emblem of their softer power. 4 knaves, jacks, in garb succinct, a trusty band, caps on their hands, and halberds in their heads and hand. And party-colored troops, a shining train, draw forth to combat on the velvet plain. The skillful nymph reviews her force with care. Let spades be trumps, she said, and trumps they were. Now move to war her sable matadors, in show like leaders of the swarthy Moors. Spadilio first, unconquerable lord, the ace of spades, led off 2 captive trumps and swept the board. As many more Manilio forced to yield. So these are the names of the cards that she's playing. And as she plays them, if you've ever played harps or anything with trumps, you play the trump, everyone has to follow, and the high card is drawing out all the other trump cards. And marched to victor from the verdant field. Him Basto followed, but his fate more hard gained but one trump and one plebeian card. With his broad saber next, a chief in years, the hoary majesty of spades appears, puts forth one manly leg. If you've ever seen the cards, it often has a leg forward on. To sight revealed the rest, his many-colored robe concealed. The rebel knave who dares his prince engage proves the just victim. So we have a card game being presented as if it's a war. As I say, that in the epic, there are often grand wars. The Iliad, the Odyssey has wars. The Aeneid has a battle, grand battle. In Paradise Lost, we have the war in heaven. There are war scenes. Here's the war scene. It's a battle of cards. And the Baron is there watching the whole thing and playing as well. And they are lost by this. And in the midst of all this exhausting game, they need a little bit of pick-me-up, so it's coffee time. Lo, the board with cups and spoons is crowned. The berries crackle, the mill turns round. On shining altars of Japan they raise the silver lamp, the fiery spirits blaze. From silver spouts the grateful liquors glide, and China's earth receives the smoking tide. They get their coffee poured for them. And down it goes, and referred to Scylla's fate, etc. But when to mischief mortals bend their will, but how soon they find instruments of ill, just then Clarissa drew with tempting grace a two-edged weapon from her shining case. Okay, so now paradise is about to be lost. Clarissa pulls out a pair of scissors, gives them to the Duke. Why does Clarissa do it? I guess she doesn't like Belinda. Instruments of ill, Clarissa drew with tempting grace a two-edged weapon from her shining case. So ladies in romance assist their knight, present the spear and arm him for the fight. He takes the gift with reverence and extends the little engine on his fingers' ends. This just behind Belinda's neck he spread, as o'er the fragrant steams she bends her head, as she's just about to drink her coffee. Swift to the lock, 1,000 sprites repair, 1,000 wings by turn blow back the hair, and thrice they twitch the diamond in her ear. Look, look, look. Thrice she looked back, and thrice the foe withdrew. Just in that instant, anxious Ariel sought the close recesses of the virgin's thought, as on the nosegay in her breast reclined. She has a flower on her lapel. He watched the ideas rising in her mind. Suddenly he viewed, in spite of all her art, an earthly lover lurking at her heart. Amazed, just like Satan in Paradise Lost, confused, he found his power expired, resigned to fate, and with a sigh retired. The peer now spreads the glittering forefex wide to enclose the lock, now joins it to divide. Even then, before the fatal engine closed, a wretched sylph too fondly interposed. So a sylph throws herself between the scissor blades and dies a miserable death to defend her lady's hair. Fate urged the shears and cut the sylph in twain. But airy substance soon unites again. The meeting points that sacred hair to sever from the fair head forever and forever. I'm trying to read it as mockingly as I can. So you get these sense here. And the concluding line of the third canto, what time would spare from steel receives its date, and monuments, like men, submit to fate. Steel could the labor of the gods destroy, and strike to dust the imperial towers of Troy. Steel could the works of mortal pride confound, and hew triumphal arches to the ground. What wonder then, fair nymph, thy hairs should feel the conquering force of unresisted steel? Okay. It's 5 cantos. You get the gist of it, so forth. What then ensued is her rage at this atrocity and the explosion of distress and rage and offended honor that ensues, and the whole thing threatens to spill out into a huge kerfuffle. And there is a resolution by the same gods that created the whole thing to begin with. Sir Fopling comes in, and Jove, and Belinda fiercely on the baron flies, with more than usual lightning in her eyes, nor feared the chief the unequal fight to try. It's like Aeneas coming up against Turnus at the end of the Aeneid, this grand battle between the two of them, who sought no more than on his foe to die. A way of, if you can see it, to die is a common euphemism for orgasm. There, the little death. He wants no more than on his foe to die. But this bold lord with manly strength endued, she with one finger and a thumb subdued. Just where the breath of life, so he grabs her by the nose, and a charge of snuff the wily virgin threw. The gnomes direct, so snuff is tobacco. You sniff it, it's perfumed often. And this is, it gives her a little bit of snuff. And the gnomes direct to every atom just the pungent grains of titillating dust, sudden with startling tear each eye o'erflows, and the high dome re-echoes to his nose. Now meet thy fate, incensed Belinda cried, and drew a deadly bodkin from her side, a hairpin, the same his ancient personage to deck. Her great-great-grandsire wore about his neck in 3 seal rings, etc. And boast not my fall, he cried, insulting foe. So they come at each other. You have a man who's a pretty ridiculous figure going back and forth with a woman who's a pretty ridiculous figure, falling out over this, and more or less, restore the lock, she cries, and all about, and compared to Othello and the lunar sphere and the muses and the founder of Rome and Bernice's locks and the whole mall and the fall of Rome and the fate of Louis XIV, whose heads, anyway, all of these things are the concluding lines, but the last lines I'll reserve for Mr. Pope himself. Then cease, bright nymph, to mourn the ravished hair, which adds new glory to the shining sphere. Not all the tresses that fair head can boast shall draw such envy as the lock you lost. For after all the murders of your eye, when after millions slain, yourself shall die, when those fair suns shall set as set they must, and all those tresses shall be laid in dust, this lock the muse shall consecrate to fame, and midst the stars inscribe Belinda's name. Because, of course, the epic is going to make this little bit of hair immortal, because people will read the rape of the lock. And it was a little lost to you, but now everyone will meditate on the grandness of your sacrifice, etc. Anyway, you've got the gist of it. That's a mock epic. It's a representation of the age of satire. Next time, we'll have more time to look at Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. Do read that in advance. Remember that it is a satire. And just think about what that entails.